Hey, what's up guys? The Pangolin here, back with another video, and today I'm here to talk about My Hero Academia. As you may know, the manga just ended after a 10-year run in Shonen Jump, which is crazy, and the anime still may be going on, but that's soon going to come to an end too. But today we're just going to talk about just what My Hero Academia means in general, what it was like following the series. It's going to be less scripted, I have some notes here and there, but I just want to show my appreciation and honestly just talk about the series and its legacy, the ups, the downs, anything. We're just going to talk about it. And I hope you guys can join me with a discussion in the comments. So let's get to it. So for me personally, I grew up watching Dragon Ball Z, Yu-Gi-Oh, those kind of things early on. I really got into anime heavy going into high school in 2014. So by the time anime was a staple in my life and I was tapped into the online community and aware of shows coming out every season, My Hero Academia came out in 2016 with a lot of hype around it. That's when I was really deep into the community, and My Hero Academia was the first big Shonen Jump show coming out after I got into anime. So for me, that was a big deal because obviously at that point I watched stuff like Naruto, which I'm like, okay, Shonen Jump has the big hitters, and obviously previous to that, Dragon Ball, Yu-Gi-Oh, whatever. But this was a new big IP that there was a lot of hype around. The manga fans hyped it up a lot. People were very excited about it, and rightfully so. It came out with a bang. A lot of discussion. It became a huge show immediately. Being the first long-term Shonen Jump anime property that I was able to follow from the beginning, it'll always be a landmark anime to me. And maybe that's why, despite the struggles it ended up having, I've stuck with the series until now and will continue to watch the anime until the end. But now that it's over, it does beg the question, what will its legacy look like? And if we're being real, part of it will definitely be the fan base, and that's the most unfortunate part if I'm being honest. The shipping, the obsession with the high school students being gay or whatever in their heads, like it just became a lot more about stuff that didn't actually matter to the story, and the fan base took on a life of its own. And now even toward the end of the manga, you see fans hating on like who's gonna end up with who. I know right before the last chapter, there were a lot of people who were like, oh, if Horikoshi makes these two people end up together, I'm going to forever hate the series and hate him, and the series is trash or whatever. I just think overall, the fan base became super unbearable online, very toxic, and they were just unwilling to take any criticism of the series. And a lot of it was based on the series, yes, but a lot of it was just based on the shipping wars that was like, this is so tangential to the series. I don't understand why this is now what this fan base wants to be known for. And considering how big the show was to start off and how crazy it was early on, the fact that the fan base was able to take over the series and really become what basically it became the series' reputation online. Now you got fans who are coming into anime now who are not going to really know what My Hero Academia was about early on, and that's super unfortunate. If you watched my video last week about the worst fan bases that ruin their anime, My Hero Academia was the only one I outright agreed with, and I feel like it's just undeniable, just the way the fan base turned the perception of the show. And then you're gonna get, because of that, more recent anime fans from the pandemic onwards, likely from late Attack on Titan or early Jujutsu Kaisen, or even just recent Jujutsu Kaisen with last year. Realistically, they only know the negative parts of My Hero Academia and its fan base, and don't let that fool you. Early My Hero Academia was a lot of fun to follow, and a good amount of the community was actually hyped about the stuff happening in the show. It was complete night and day from early My Hero Academia 2016 to 2018 era to pandemic era and the internet. Everyone's actually cooped up inside, like chronically online discussing these ships. It's complete night and day. And the proof is that those early seasons, I can just gush about the show. Like from season 1, you have USJ at the end of that season, and you have the All Might versus Nomu fight. Maybe it's not the best sign, but to this day, that's still one of the highlights of the entire series. That fight scene showed the potential of My Hero Academia. The season up until then was still good. It was building, it was finding its ground. You're like, okay, this is pretty solid. When you see All Might versus Nomu, and you think, oh, this is pure hype inspiration, you get You Say Run, which we're gonna talk about, just crazy track. And then at that moment you realize, oh, this show could be insane. You're like, okay, we're going from the previous era to this era, and this can really take the show off into a new height. And then the season ends, you're like, okay, I'm really looking forward to season 2. And the fan base reflected that at the time. People were just super excited about it. So then you go into season 2 and you get the UA Sports Festival, obligatory tournament arc. That was also super hype, for me at least. I don't know what the general perception is about that, but I feel like people generally enjoyed it. People love tournament arcs in general, and that was essentially My Hero Academia's tournament arc. But just like, even to this day, the 3 main things, and I'll get onto the third one in a second, but 2 of the 3 main things I still rewatch online for My Hero Academia are All Might versus Nomu, and then you get Deku versus Todoroki, when you see the entire arena explode from the fire and ice, like the expansion of the atoms or whatever the hell is going on, the science behind that, the rapid cooled and heat to the expansion, Deku going all out, trying to bait it out of him, so then they really clash at the end. You see all the animation with the cubes breaking apart. That's just insane. Like, at the time, that was so ridiculously hyped in the community and just in general. Like, that was one of the things that made My Hero Academia cemented. Like, it was All Might versus Nomu, and then you got that, and you're like, okay, this is the big show right now. And I think at that time, that was relatively undeniable. Of course, you still had shows like Attack on Titan around, but Attack on Titan, at that point, I'm not sure of the exact timing, but like, it was still taking time for seasons to come out. But My Hero Academia was coming out pretty much every year, so it just maintained the hype train. And then you go straight into season 3, All Might versus All for One. Like, to me personally, that's the peak of the series. Some people might say other parts, maybe later on. There's still great stuff that comes later on, but for me, that's this part of the series where every year I go back on YouTube and I'm like, I need to watch this again. There's just something about All Might as a character that really cements the series. And personally, I feel like this is not a hot take. I think a lot of people agree with this. All Might should have died in that fight. I think the series would have become infinitely stronger from then on if All Might was dead. Even not dying, like, it's just still an amazing fight. Just the United States is smashed, like, you never forget that. Like, the end of the fight where he points at the camera and Deku's just there, and only Deku understands that he's pointing at him, saying that he's up next. But then Bakugo is standing next to Deku, and he kind of gets the inkling. He's like, okay, there's something more to their relationship than was previously known. And you kind of get like where that goes from there as well. There's just so much building up to that fight. Even the fact that leading up to that fight, you have the camp when they're in the forest kind of area, and then muscular fight. Izuku muscular fight was crazy. Then Bakugo gets kidnapped. That whole sequence was insane. And they're trying to turn Bakugo to the dark side. And at that point, you're not actually sure if that's going to happen because Bakugo is built up to be the super aggressive, negative guy. But then you get his character development with the fact that he's actually just as big an All Might fan as Izuku. So he's never going over to that side, which the villains miscalculated with. So then you get, okay, we have to rescue Bakugo, and some of the students going to rescue him, but they can't actually fight. So they're just pulling an operation, pull the ice, the Frozone, boom, out of there. But then you get All Might coming in on his last legs, the embers about to go out, and then they just go crazy. Like, that whole season in sequence is just some of the best shonen we've gotten in the last decade. It just is what it is. And people might not want to admit that now because of where the series has gone, but at the time, I think that was honestly undeniable. But of course, if we're talking about everything, then we have to talk about some of the struggles, because then you go into season 4. Not to say season 4 was bad at all, but the overall arc, it's okay. It's solid. I don't hate it personally, but it's definitely on the downtrend from the peaks of season 3. And then you get into Gentle Criminal, where I'm like, come on, bro. I know some people like Gentle Criminal. There's some interesting themes with Gentle Criminal, but just overall, I'm like, because it's also taking place where they're setting up this rock band that they want to do for the school festival. I was just like, come on, miss me with this, bro. So in season 4, you're starting to become a little indifferent. You're like, I don't know. This season 1 through 3 were so good, and then season 4 is kind of like, I don't know. Then season 5 and 6 kind of blend together to me, so I honestly don't remember exactly what happened in which season, but I think season 5 you get like My Villain Academia, which to me is a great arc in the manga. Let's put it like that, in the manga. In the anime, and I know this is a video about the manga ending, but we gotta talk about the anime too, because that has defined a lot of its legacy. In the manga, My Villain Academia is amazing, one of the best arcs in the whole series, but the reality is it wasn't favored in Japan. That's just what it is. They just had a different preference, the Japanese fan base, for what they want to see. I think they would just prefer to see the heroes in the limelight. So when it came to the anime, My Villain Academia was kind of butchered. Honestly, it wasn't really executed the way it could have been. And then you also get the Paranormal Liberation War, which was solid, and you get Endeavor Agency, which to me is a great arc as well. I think maybe a little bit slept on. I think once the manga started focusing on Endeavor, that was some of the best work that Horikoshi did in terms of a character's development in the whole show, honestly. And it's not even one of the students. Like, that was really good stuff. It was more interesting even than Todoroki, which is like where that story starts, but really a lot of the work is being done with Endeavor to improve for Todoroki. And you got the Deku going solo when he's like just leaves the school. He's like, I'm gonna go on my own and just start saving people when the villains escape, and that stuff is really good too. I wouldn't say it's one of the peaks, but it's really interesting, different framing of the series, because up until a lot of earlier on, it's super bright, happy-go-lucky. Like, obviously there are issues that they have, but when this is part of the story is happening, it becomes quite dark and grim. Like, not super gory or anything like that, but just the tone of the show went in a completely different direction. Of course, during this time, and then you got like Deku getting all these different powers from the vestiges of One for All, and then all of a sudden this dude's Spider-Man and has some power where you can look at the smoke out, so you got a smoke screen, and he's basically flying and all this different stuff. It became a little bit like, this dude's already All Might, and then he's just getting power on power, just whatever is convenient to take out what we need to take out in the end. It's not the best, unfortunately, but it wasn't the worst either. But what was really cool for me in the later parts of the manga, where Shigaraki's awakening fight, that was really dope. Like, when he first like leaves the lab and he's like, oh, he's coming, and then everyone's like, okay, we gotta deal with this now. That was super hype for me. Like, I really think that was one of the highlights of the later series, when it's really Shigaraki fighting all of them. Because then after that, when, not to get too much in spoilers about how this happens, but Shigaraki as a character starts getting a bit devalued by All for One and his plans, and I wasn't as much a fan of that, and what like the stuff that happens after that. I won't get too much into it. Then you also had Star and Stripes' introduction along the way, and then her quick phasing out. I just think that was super weak writing. I just wasn't a fan of Star and Stripes, how they used her. I thought she had a lot of potential as a character, but how they ended up using her, I just felt it was a bit cheap. Like, if you wanted to kill someone off, do it with one of the more developed characters. I felt like that was a bit of a cheap way to have Shigaraki actually take someone out. And I didn't even mention any of the training arcs and like going against Class B, which I don't hate as much as others, but it definitely curbs the pacing of the anime. And when they're going back to back with weaker parts of the story, it's just kind of a drag. That's where you get in like that season 4, season 5 lull, where it's like half of those seasons I'm pretty sure are just like training arcs or just like school festival arcs, but then the other half is Gentle Criminal and Overhaul, which is okay, and then you get My Hero Academia. My Villain Academia, but then even that's not handled as well as it could have been. That's where you start to run into issues. Like, those breaks with training and going against Class B work when they're paired in the season, with super hype parts of the story. You can kind of understand that pacing, but then otherwise it kind of suffers. And something I think that's not talked about enough is that I think My Hero Academia also suffered from the interest in superheroes waning toward the end of the 2010s as well. Like when it first came out, the MCU was in its heyday with the best season 3, airing at the same time that arguably the best MCU movie, Infinity War, was out in theaters. Maybe a coincidence, maybe not, but I think that fever pitch of superhero hype definitely trickled down to My Hero Academia. But of course, if it benefited from the highs, it's likely not a coincidence that the MCU struggling the last few years, and DC being all over the place, hasn't been the best for a My Hero Academia series that was also going through some downswings. Maybe you could counter with The Boys and Invincible, but I say those shows are thriving despite the downward trend because they are commentaries on the genre rather than a traditional take like My Hero Academia. And I don't want to get too much into what happens beyond the current season that's airing, but I'll just say that it doesn't have the best ending ever, but it's also not terrible, which I guess is more than you can say for most series, but I wouldn't say you're like completely satisfied. A lot of the plot lines just weren't wrapped up, and a lot of characters just get through very sticky situations that you're like, realistically, if you want this to hit, you gotta let them go. But I think Horikoshi just wasn't willing to commit to taking some of these characters out. But a lot of the great themes from early in the series that like establish the series do persist to the end. And I think that's one of the strong points of the writing, but there just are some confusing plot holes as well. So as you can tell, overall, I think the My Hero Academia falling off, quote unquote, is way overblown. But because there's a lot of good stuff in there, but you just can't deny that it definitely isn't where it was in those first 3 seasons. One thing that'll never stop hitting though is You Say Run. I know I mentioned that earlier on. I said I'd get back to it. I don't really have much more to say on it other than the fact that it's a goated track, generational hype from You Say Run. Put You Say Run over anything, and that scene immediately gets way more hype, way more inspirational, and I think that's just a genius at work right there. Yuki Hayashi, you killed it. Now that I got that out of the way though, if we're talking about the legacy overall, I just honestly think My Hero Academia is a series that'll be remembered one way or another. Like whether you liked it or not, My Hero Academia, along with Black Clover, transitioned shonen from the big 3 era to the modern era of Jujutsu Kaisen, Kimetsu no Yaiba, Chainsaw Man, and Black Clover honestly wasn't pulling its weight at the beginning. So for a few years, it really was all My Hero Academia until Black Clover got really good, which it did. Black Clover ended up becoming really good too. But it's also important to note that it's also an influential series from a formatting standpoint. Before My Hero Academia, most shonen, particularly from Jump, were long-running series that aired every week for the most part, which resulted in an absurd amount of filler episodes, so that those anime wouldn't catch up to their manga counterparts. On top of carrying the shonen fandom for those years, it also had an industry-shifting role in helping the health of big shonen anime, reducing filler, giving the mangaka room to breathe, and helping the animators not need to work on the show year-round. Now we have the season format, getting a new one every 1.5 to 2 years, which we still see today for the new shonen that come out now, and it's for the better. But all of that aside, despite what I might think about the series, which is generally positive, but even with its downsides, I just think it's really important for me to say thank you to Horikoshi-sensei, and hopefully you get a well-earned rest, because I know you wanted to end this manga a long time ago. And I'll also be looking forward to whatever you do next. But anyway, enough with the sappy stuff. Thanks for watching, especially if you made it this far. Let me know in the comments your thoughts about My Hero Academia as a whole, or the ending. Just try to spoiler tag anything beyond where the anime is. It's a roller coaster for sure. And I'm curious, what will replace it? So let me know if you have any thoughts or predictions about that as well. If you have about 5 seconds to spare, then please like, subscribe, all that good stuff. I should have a new video out same time next week. See ya.